kind of evolved from that layer and just added more. It's kind of like layers of layers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really just a bunch of interior, but they're called different, and there's some different differences between them, and we'll go into that after this.
Well, do you want to just dive right on into the next one, which is microservices?
Yeah, let's go into microservices. So with microservices, you kind of have these clients, which will be like your UIs. Say you have a web system and you have a mobile system or a mobile app.
Right.
And they both those UIs will point to an API gateway. And from that gateway, it'll kind of decide which service it needs to call based on your request.
Right.
And what microservice architecture is all about is kind of living in your own space. So you'll have a service and a database just for that layer a lot of times. I've seen some that are called microservices and they share like database and stuff like that. It's kind of more of a cost problem, and the more databases you get, because microservices is really heavy on resources. Like you're having a single database, a single service that runs by itself. That's the whole thing about microservices, is they kind of run in a silo by themselves, and they have their own. You can debug them, you can test them. They run completely by themselves. And what you'll run into a lot with microservices is repeated code. Because you're in a different service, but it shares something.
I was going to jump into that because in a microservice architecture, you want loosely coupled objects, and you want loosely coupled components, and which breaks away from traditional object-oriented programming, and it's hard for people to kind of understand that,
that it's okay to copy and paste the code.
Yes, I've been at some companies where after I've gone through domain-driven design and that approach and stuff like that, I went to my next job and some of the developers were really heavy into object-oriented programming and shared libraries and I was like, oh, wait a minute, I truly believe in a microservices architecture and I go into that whatever job I'm at or that project knowing that some code is going to be duplicated, and that's okay. It's okay. Because if you're using a shared library and something about that shared library is updated and it just somehow got through the QA process and it was buggy, it's going to bring down everything.
All your services.
All of your services are down, and that's the beauty of microservices, is that each one stands on its own. And
which means that there are some pitfalls. So if you have common code in several services, since they aren't sharing anything, if you have to change something pretty significant in that one service, you most likely have to copy it over to the other services.
You may have to,
So that there is some pitfalls maybe to that extent. But I think overall there's just big advantages to doing microservice architecture.
Well, let's talk about deployments night. Deployments, when you have a release night, with monoliths, you have to, you used to have to, everyone come in, you bring the system down, you have to put up a maintenance page up on your site, while you go through maintenance, and it's all hands on deck and everything gets updated.
And hopefully nothing goes wrong.
And hope that nothing goes wrong. And we've seen deployments last all night. And some of them even go into the afternoon because the deployment was not successful.
And that's something key with microservices, that they're in their own container, their own world, where you can just push that out. And that's all you're needing to test, is that little bit. There's not really any side effects. And also bringing up when you have an outage. Say one of these services for some reason goes down. It doesn't break your whole application. It'll just break those calls. Whereas in the monolith, if something goes down, they all live on that same server. So if it goes down, it's down.
And deployments, you when you want to deploy a certain feature that was an update to a microservice, your entire site is up. You may not have that specific microservice available to you, but the site continues to function. And it's all about uptime. uptime.
Uptown.
Uptime. It's all about uptime, and you know, with a monolith, you don't have that. You have to bring the whole system down. You know, and companies today, they need that visibility. They need their systems up at all times.
And it does, like, it still makes sense to do a monolithic application, I think, for smaller application.
Yeah.
And like one of the negative sides of microservices, or something we'll go into in a second, service oriented, they're costly. They're not cheap.
Right.
And a lot of organizations, especially smaller ones, can't afford that. They're we got to have it living on one thing.
Right. And I'd say I'd take it a step further, is that, you know, it also depends on the size of your company, because when you're a small company, or maybe even a medium-sized company, a monolith is really the way to go, because, you know, like you said, it becomes costly to deploy all of these microservices. You know, and
then you turn into that phase where once you get to a certain point, you start taking it out and creating, like our one company that we worked at together. That's the whole reason we were there, to take
that monolith and start separating it out into
that got them through the first 5-10 years of their company, and they were just trying to win every way they could. It's a no-brainer once you have enough money and the resources don't matter.
And there comes a point in time when your monolith outgrows your customer base, or when your customer base outgrows your monolith, you know, and response times start getting longer and longer and longer, and your database is just bloating with rows and rows of data, and at that point in time, then you need to look at a microservices type of architecture, you know.
And I will say there are some performance hits with microservices, because you have to communicate with the layers, and it's usually through REST. So you're having another way of you're going through the gateway, and then you're going. So one of the drawbacks to microservices would be the response time, since you're going through an API gateway, and then that API gateway will call another API, most likely, to get to that microservice. It does slow down because you're just going through more network. You know, the networking, you're just going through another portal. So I did want to mention that. It's very small. It's not a huge performance hit, but it is, and you know, people do care about those things.
It's a small disadvantage, you know, and it leads into you know, troubleshooting. How do you, you know, the one of the disadvantages is troubleshooting, you know, a microservice. It has to go through several layers. And one of the important parts of microservices you have to make sure you have is that you have logging in each layer. You know, if you have a gateway and then several services that comprise of an eventual save, then you need to be able to look at each service in each gateway's log to be able to isolate where the issue is, because, you know, you can look in a microservice log itself, and you may not even see that it got to that point.
Not even got there.
Yes. So you can either start at the very end, or you can start at the beginning, or you can start somewhere in the middle. You know, and you know, it's always standard practice to have logging at all places within your microservices. So
it's definitely a lot more you have to look through, because you separated these things out. It's not just like our interior approach we looked at. There's just so much more where you can have an error in. So when you're debugging and troubleshooting, it can be a little more maintenance, I guess.
Yes, a lot more maintenance.